I wanted to see if a palm tree could survive the winter in the Toronto area. After visiting a garden center which imports tropical trees in Simcoe County and viewing a few different types of palm trees, I decided to purchase a pygmy date palm. I chose this Florida pygmy date palm because to me, it's the prettiest type of palm tree. It has that soft, flowy look as opposed to windmill palms which look tough and rough. Also, windmill palms are already found throughout the Vancouver area as they are winter hardy, and the winters there are mild. So I wanted to see if a different palm tree, one which is a staple of Florida and the tropics, could survive the ground throughout a real Toronto winter. I felt this experiment would be interesting, as from what I read, pygmy date palms can survive cold weather down to -4 Celsius for up to 3 or 4 days with some sustained damage. I planted it in July of 2020. It did very well for the remainder of the summer. Initially, it looked very healthy. I watered it about once every 3 or 4 days. We basked in the flowing beauty of its delicate fronds, which had a glossy finish to them and were pigmented with a deep, lush green. I did not notice any new growth during this period, but the existing fronds seemed to fare well. The only issue I had planting the tree was not being able to dig deep enough. The tree needed to go in 24 inches. However, we hit construction debris at 16 inches. To compensate for this, I put several bags of garden soil on top to cover up the roots. The drawback to this was that gravity and rain would cause that topsoil to sink and fall, exposing some of the roots again. As summer began to turn to fall, I noticed more of the fronds browning and a few of them dying out. Sparingly, I pruned the tree. We had a scorching summer and a pleasant fall. I began designing a greenhouse in mid-October. Searching online for ready-made solutions, the prefabricated greenhouses I found were too small. I needed a 13-foot by 8-foot by 8-foot frame. After gaining some ideas from DIY greenhouses online, I settled on a polypipe wood hybrid design of my own. It was lightweight, affordable, costing about $500 and not too difficult to put together. I took detailed measurements of the backyard, making sure to account for the sloping ground, and started modeling a design in 3D Studio Max. The design took 2 days and construction took another 5. Details of the design are in the link in the description. It was a relatively mild winter in southern Ontario this year, but we still had our severe cold snaps. During the day, if it was sunny enough, the greenhouse would hit temperatures of 34 degrees Celsius and above. I was shocked with how powerfully and efficiently the sun alone could heat the greenhouse. However, as the sun would set, the drop in temperature was drastic. Unfortunately, drastic drops in temperature are harsh for this palm, so this daily drop in temperature at sunset became a source of concern for me. At night and on cloudy days, the greenhouse was heated by 2 120-volt radiant heaters. They worked well and on average raised the temperature about 11 degrees Celsius during the night. I would usually turn the heaters on when the temperature would fall below 9 degrees Celsius. Sometimes I'd keep both heaters on milder nights I'd keep only one on. Sometimes I'd run them at full power, sometimes half, and sometimes I'd have them on automatic mode so they would turn on and off themselves, trying to maintain the set target temperature. Halfway through the winter, I realized the ground was not heated adequately. It was difficult finding information on how to take care of this tree in the ground in the winter in a northern climate. I think this was because almost no one tries to do that. I got pipe heating cables which I installed in the ground. I dug out a trench around the roots and put 2 layers of these heating cables in. Unfortunately, I feel they were woefully inadequate. They were quite low powered, using about 7 watts per foot, and only turned on when a thermometer above ground started approaching 0 Celsius. The problem with that was that above ground, the greenhouse was almost always well above 0 Celsius, so the ground heating cables were almost always off. What a waste of energy and time doing all that digging. I ended up discovering that pygmy date palms grow well when the ground is at least 65 degrees Fahrenheit. I suspect I was well below that mark. I read that pygmy date palms should be watered only once every 15 days or so in the winter. What I didn't take into account was that that guideline was for a tropical or subtropical climate, or maybe even for indoor growing. I also read, perhaps from a badly worded source, that the tree required 45 liters of water. So I went ahead and gave it 45 liters of cold water in the late fall and early winter. That was a disastrous mistake. Until this point, the fronds remained green, although the color was turning into a lighter, more faded green. Almost immediately after watering the tree, however, they started turning brown. The pace of browning was very rapid. It looked like the tree was dying at an accelerated rate. Not learning from my mistake, I watered it again after 15 days with about 30 liters, hoping to see a recovery. After a couple more weeks, in the dead of winter, I realized my mistake. I should not have watered it anywhere near that much. Based on these results, I concluded that in the winter, a well-grown pygmy date palm in a northern climate does not require that much water at all. In fact, watering it the way I did was very damaging. In addition to watering it incorrectly, I also did not provide it with enough light. Being as it was my first winter with a greenhouse, I did not realize how much less light the tree receives through December, January, and February. While I did have a 500-watt halogen light in the greenhouse, it was almost never on to manage energy cost. The daily routine continued. I turned the heaters on during the night, turned them off during the sunny days. I drastically reduced how much water I gave it, providing maybe only 5 to 10 liters once every 25 days or so. To activate the ground heating cables, I would take snow and ice from outside and place it on their temperature sensors above ground. This would turn the cables on only for short intervals, maybe 1 to 2 hours at a time. During extremely cold nights, when the temperature would dip below minus 10 degrees Celsius, I provided additional heating muscle with a 5000 BTU portable propane heater. This was very powerful and would usually add an additional 6 Celsius or so of heat. Often, I'd go into the greenhouse in the dead of night between 1 and 3 a.m. to change the propane cylinders, as they would only last about 5 hours. Overall, the palm tree did not do well in the winter, and by the end of the season, seemed like it might be dead or nearly dead. The only green left on the tree by the end of the winter was just a little on the crown at the stems of fronds. There were no green palm leaves left. I was devastated. I read that as long as there is even a little bit of green at the crown, the tree is still alive. I also read that if you were to chop off all fronds, but the crown remained intact, fronds would grow back. The crown of my palm tree was definitely green, maybe up to about 3 to 4 inches, so I concluded the tree still had some life in it. On this hope, I continued taking care of it. The daily routine from the winter continued into the early spring, turning heaters on at night, turning them off during sunny days. I did not notice any significant new growth during early spring. By late April, the weather had warmed up just enough for me to feel comfortable taking the greenhouse down. It took me about 6 hours to disassemble the 350 or so screws holding the whole thing together. With the palm tree exposed, the nights would hover around 4 to 5 Celsius and the days would warm up to 10 plus Celsius. There were some mid-spring days where temperatures briefly hit below zero with the palm trees exposed. The palms still did not show significant new growth. So the greenhouse has been opened and the palm trees took quite a bit of damage over the winter. However, it is May 23rd, 2021. To my heart's immense delight, by late spring, I began seeing new growth. New baby fronds began to sprout from the crown. They were very small and thin, and sometimes I'd even question whether what I was seeing was actual new growth at all. But I stayed positive and hopeful and began mildly watering it again. At the start of the summer, the exposed roots issue, due to the shallow depth of the planting, was bothering me, so I decided to solve the issue properly this time. I had scrap wooden slats which I cut down to size and built a parameter with around the base of the tree. It was simple construction. The parameter had a diameter of about 36 inches and was simply hammered into place with a mallet. I wrapped some light string around it a few times to keep the arrangement intact. Then I filled it with 2 bags of garden soil. This adequately covered the exposed roots. By mid to late June, I was watering it as I normally did the previous summer, once every 4 days or so. Once again, to my extreme delight, the new growth continued, and by this point it was undeniable. The tree was alive and growing. I read contradictory information about pruning. Some said it was done too much and was not as necessary as many believe, and others encouraged it liberally. I took a balanced approach. Fronds that were totally brown from head to toe were cut off, while fronds which still had some green at the stem were spared. By July, the palm tree had entered what I would consider a rapid growth phase. Fronds began regenerating and growing pleasantly fast. It's July the 21st, 2021, and the pygmy date palm is really starting to look like a palm tree again. It's starting to take the characteristic shape of a palm tree, and it even grew this, which I believe is the seed, and I could be wrong, but I think this indicates that it's a female pygmy date palm. But I would describe this as in a state of rapid growth now. Alhamdulillah. I'm watering this about once every, let's say, 4 days. It is August 6th, 2021, and the palm trees are doing very well. There are a few baby fronds inside. I don't know if you can make them out, but if you kind of move these bigger fronds out of the way, you can see this is a fresh frond right here.
Where, Baba? Where, Baba?
Right here, this one, growing. And there's a couple more in there that I've seen. The fronds on this stem seem to be taller, and everything is doing really well. I think this is the seed
What seed, Baba?
of the pygmy date palm.
What seed, Baba?
But yeah, it's really looking like it's getting back to looking like a nice, that nice pygmy date. It is now late August, and the palm, 13 months after having been planted and having survived a southern Ontario winter in the ground in my backyard, albeit in a greenhouse, is thriving. The palm tree is starting to look more and more like it did when I first bought it last July. The fronds have filled in, and the crowns of both stems are topped with a dense assortment of luscious fronds. The lengths of the fronds are also growing at a healthy rate, and now there seems to be much more green at the top than brown. It even seems like some of the fronds which had brown began to turn green again. The growing season continues into October, so the tree still has plenty of growing season left. On some fronds, there might be signs of a potassium deficiency, but I am fertilizing it regularly and am not too worried about it. I cannot tell you how happy I am. When I see this tree still well and alive, it truly fills my heart with an abundance of warmth. I would literally pray this tree would pull through the winter and survive, and thank God it totally did. This tree meant a lot more to me than just the tree. My attachment to it has personal reasons behind it. Needless to say, I love this pygmy date palm with all my heart. In my opinion, by far the biggest mistake I made was grossly overwatering it in the winter. To make matters worse, I watered it with nearly ice-cold water from the backyard tap. The tree was largely green before I watered it for the first time in winter, and almost immediately after turned brown. The other big mistake I think I made was not providing it enough fresh air. Many greenhouses run fans for a reason. Not only did I not have fans, I did not have windows either. To mitigate this, I would, weather permitting and in varying degree, open the front and rear doors of the greenhouse. To get some circulation going, I would often fan one of the doors several times. I suspect more constant ventilation and circulation would have yielded better results. Another major mistake I made was not heating the ground enough. As mentioned earlier, based on my research, growth in this tree doesn't really begin until the ground temperature is consistently at least 65 degrees Fahrenheit. I'm pretty sure I was well below that all winter. I plan on rectifying all my mistakes from last winter. To heat the ground better, I will dig a trench around the bulb of the tree, put some plastic sheeting around the outside of the trench to prevent flooding, and place small 400-watt heaters inside. I believe these below-ground heaters will heat the ground enough to reach that 65 degree Fahrenheit mark. I will also include adjustable swivel windows into the design of my greenhouse. and install fans on opposite ends for circulation. I will also invest in better greenhouse lighting and keep those lights on far more than I did last winter. Finally, I will not overwater the tree with nearly ice-cold water this winter. One thing that will make this year's greenhouse easier to build is that it will be a lot smaller, since the span of the fronds is nowhere near as expansive as it was last fall. So yes, a pygmy date palm tree, a real palm tree, can absolutely survive the ground in the winter in a homemade greenhouse in Toronto, in southern Ontario.